Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of John Jamelske. Truly terrifying case. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Bonjour, welcome. Hope you're okay. Don't know where the French came from. I am happy to be here, very excited. I'm high energy today, so I'm going to try and not talk too fast, but this is what stress will do to you. I have a car in the garage and yeah, I wish I could sprout wings and fly because I do not like cars. They are not my friend. Anyhow, today's case is taking us back to the US of A. We're going to Syracuse. It's a strange word to say. How would you say that in American? You know what I mean, American accent. Syracuse. No, oh my God. Syracuse. Who talks like that? Anyhow, I think it's in New York, or a suburb of New York. So New York, coffee. Syracuse. I can't do it. James Jamelske, he's no laughing matter because this case they're always unbelievable, but this one has blown my mind yet again. Why am I always surprised? It's like, Sophie, you've been doing Sin and Tonic for about 3 years. Get with it. Get with the horrific programme. He wasn't a very smart cookie at school. He struggled academically. He was a loner. Aren't there words that just stand out where you're like, tick, tick, tick? He did, however, graduate from Morrisville State College with a degree in watchmaking. You never think of it too, but yeah, watchmaking. He married a school teacher named Dorothy Richmond. They went on to have 3 children together, and it all sounds very normal. Until 1988, when all hell breaks loose, to put it lightly. In that year, his wife became poorly. She was very unwell and she had cancer. And I don't think it is a coincidence that that is the same year that he began his reign of terror. She was a poorly person. This also meant that, it feels gross to say it to be honest, but it meant that their sex life, took a decline because she was really ill. Instead of finding healthy ways to manage that or deal with that, he developed a very unique way of coping with that loss. Jamelske would kidnap his first victim in 1988. Now, there was a bunker underneath the house. His family were aware of it, and this blows my mind that they were. They were aware that that existed, but it was an unusual bunker. It wasn't just like a door down into a basement. It was tricky. It was a tricky space to get into. That did not stop him, though, from using it for his awfulness. His first kidnapped victim was a 14-year-old Native American girl, and he ended up keeping her, locking her against her will in his dungeon. It was known as his dungeon, that's what he called it, for 2 years. It must have been a truly terrifying ordeal. John lured her into his car, saying that he was going to give her a ride home. It was a different time. It was 1988, so hitchhiking, giving people lifts, that was more of a common thing then. And it was just shocking what he did. So he then took her to his mother's property. And when she woke up, she was in a well, in the bottom of a well. She thought she was in some sort of cellar. She had no idea what was going on, the poor thing. He then moved her from the well, and I can only imagine that he didn't have the opportunity to take her home straight away because he had his family there. But at some point in those first 2 days, he removed her from the well and he took her to this dungeon in his house, underneath his house. And when I read this, once I'd read this whole case and researched everything and found out what he'd done, I sort of sometimes the bigger picture overshadows these smaller pieces of the story. But I was like, this child, 14-year-old child, has been kidnapped. I mean, that is horrific enough. And then she's been in a well for 2 days, in a cold, damp, that in itself is just, can you imagine that? And then to be removed, I mean, all along the way, Personally, I would think, this is it, he's going to kill me now, or what have you. It did not end there. And that was just a small part of her story. Just those first few days, I just think, it's amazing how the human body can survive, because the terror and the cold and the lack of food and water and things like that, it's just, it really caught me, just the thought of those first few days for his victims, and especially with this victim, because she was taken to that horrible well. She was put in a well. The entrance to the dungeon was a steel door hidden behind a bookshelf, and then you went through that, and then you had to crawl to the next steel door. So it's like Fort Knox, isn't it? It's crazy. Like, it just makes it feel so hopeless as well. He then put a chain round his victim's ankle, and there was a small ladder once you got to the dungeon that you had to climb down. I'll share some pictures. And that was where he would shackle his victims. So they would be shackled at the bottom of this ladder in this dungeon. For 2 years, this poor victim was subjected to emotional and physical torture. She was R-worded every single day that she was there. She was there for 2 years. So the emotional and the physical toll on her was great. She was told that her family were going to be murdered or hurt if she tried to escape or if she said anything. And it was absolutely vile. She was treated like an animal. In the dungeon, there was an old bathtub and a hose, so you would have to wash yourself down with a hose. That was how you were cleaned, if you could call it that. And that would then make the floor of the dungeon really wet and damp. I just, again, kind of think of the strength in the human body there, because that would have probably been quite damaging to health. The toilet situation was absolutely grim and dire as well. It was like a chair that had the seat removed over a bucket, and it feels humiliating and cold, damp, just absolutely miserable. The walls were covered with phrases. He'd written things on the wall, that would just make me think, this is where it ends for me, because the minute there's like things scribbled and scrawled across walls, it's like, I just feel like that's game over. He'd written things like, "Peace to all who enter here." Whoa, peace, alongside phrases like "bring on the pain," hate. Yeah, he also hung a crucifix above the door to the dungeon. During those 2 years, especially in the beginning, he didn't know what the police knew and what was going on in the case, obviously, because she was reported missing. So he had this girl write letters to her family. So that must have just been agonising to know that. And I can't say I've not been in that position, but perhaps some comfort in the fact that she was alive because she was writing to them. But just torture, absolute torture, to know that she was being kept against her will. Also, he had pictures of her family. So he was incredibly sneaky, because there's some things that I don't fully understand in the case, but he did a very good job of making her truly believe that he was going to kill her family. And if you're with this person that's keeping you hostage, or not hostage, is it hostage? Keeping you against your will, and they produce a photograph of your family, that is going to scare you half to death. It's terrifying. And he's also doing these awful things to you and treating you badly, and so she was truly terrified for her family, this poor girl. And then the absolute opposite of what I was expecting to happen in this case happened. He let her go. He kidnapped her when she was 14 years old, and then he released her when she was 17. He let her go home. In that time, 2 years is a long time, and she truly believed that her family would be murdered and killed if she said the truth about what had happened. So she simply told them that she had run away, and that is what John had told her to say. It was another 2 years before John would find another victim. He called it cruising. He'd go out cruising. Ugh. No. To look for victims. Now, usually it would be people that he thought would not be missed, and I find that so terribly sad. First of all, a child. Do you really think a child is not going to be missed? But with his first victim, she came from a family, but I suppose he could have thought that she was a runaway, or you never know. But they have a knack, don't they, predators, of picking out vulnerable victims, easy targets. In 1995, he would acquire his next victim. So that's 5 years after he had let... 5 years? Yeah, he abducted her in 1988, released her after sort of 2 years, so 1990 or 1991, and then 1995. Do the maths, my brain doesn't do it. Anyhow, he has found another victim, 1995, another 14-year-old girl. He lures her into the car by saying that he needs help delivering a package. This time, he took this victim straight to the dungeon. It was said that this victim, the second victim, put up a fight, and she did still end up shackled to the ladder in the dungeon, and she was kept there, and it was the same situation as with his first victim. There were daily R words, which is just, it's horrific, and the bath situation and the toilet and the damp, dark, horrible dungeon. He named it the dungeon as well. He knew full well, just so we're aware from right now, he named it the dungeon, he called it his dungeon, and he knew full well how dank and dirty and it was. It wasn't a hotel. Writing "Peace be with you" or whatever it was on the wall does not do, oh, I'm so comforted. Oh. This victim was asked to keep a diary. What is she doing? Where's she going? What? But he wanted to know. It was more like he wanted to know things like, had she bathed that day? Gone to the toilet, B was bath, T was brush their teeth, like there was a code. He even made them write an R if they had been R-worded, and he used that word as well. So he called it his dungeon, and he used the R word, when describing the acts and what was going on with these girls. So he was aware. Alongside the diaries, there was also video evidence, and I find that so heartbreaking, really, for the victims to know that's out there, that's in the world. It's just so sad. But they were recorded, so their abuse was recorded, and he said he was recording it for his bosses. In my head, it's like he's taking the the blame off of himself, I'm being asked to do this. It made him feel better somehow. I'm making that up, but I'm just thinking that seems like he's removing himself from the responsibility. So he said he was filming the torture and the abuse for his bosses, and they were making him do it. And again, he let the victim go. She told her mother everything, but it wasn't reported to the police, and it was through fear that he would follow through on his threats to murder her and her family. And it was reported that she saw him in his car. She must have been terrified. So she's been released, but it's still trapping. You're still trapped because you believe that this person is going to kill you and your family. So just really living in so much trauma for these victims. So it wasn't reported to the police. Victim number 3 was very different, actually, because he switched up his what's it called? Preference? That seems horrible to say. But both of his first victims, the 2 girls, were 14 years old. Third victim is 53. So that's a big age difference. And also she was Vietnamese. And I find that unusual, because I think in most cases there is a pattern and a similarity in the victim type. And this was just wildly different. So this happened in 1997. So he's ramping up the time in between victims. He lured the victim into his car under the guise of being lonely and wanting to make friends. They drove around for a while. They chatted a bit. They couldn't understand each other very well because he didn't speak Vietnamese and she didn't speak much English. So that was tricky. Let me make friends even though we can't talk. And he drove her around for a while, but then the ruse was up and he took her back to his house and back to the dungeon. This victim, again, was reported missing a couple of days later by her boyfriend, and there were no leads, nothing. It's like these women and girls were being abducted. There was no leads. And again, there were some differences here. He was more violent towards this victim. He beat her, he hit her so badly that it damaged her ear. And alongside what happened before, which was the daily R words, and he made her do chores. So I think he was taking her out of the dungeon and doing chores around the house. He also put a TV in the dungeon this time, so she had some TV, and he liked listening to her singing, and it was all very it was a bizarre sort of twist in his MO. Oh, and I read that he put a skeleton next to her, so a fake, a like a Halloween thing, next to her one night when she was sleeping. So she woke up and she was terrified because she thought she was next to human remains. So he was still psychologically torturing her as well, and he took great delight in it. Who is this guy? There was another big difference with victim number 3. After a year, she was released. She was taken to a bus station, I believe, and given some money to get home. And she went to the police. So this is his 3rd victim, but the first victim that was going to report him. And it was an absolute shit show. There's no other way of saying it. She was, it just makes you angry. The police shouted at her, told her she was lying. She had a full description of this man that had abducted her. And yes, it does sound far-fetched and unbelievable, but really, they took it upon themselves to not believe her story. There wasn't much that she had to give them. She did give them a description. They didn't believe her, so it didn't matter. But she couldn't say where exactly this house was, and it just fizzled to nothing, and they weren't trying anyway. In 1999, his wife passed away. And I was surprised to hear that. I suppose he was grieving, but I was surprised to hear that there wasn't a victim taken that year. But there was not. It wasn't until 2001. This time the victim was 26 years old. She was a mother. He abducts her, takes her back to the dungeon, and this time he keeps her for 2 months. I'm not using names because they were given fake names, all of the victims. This victim was actually given the name Jennifer, and she went on to be on TV on the Larry King Show and things like that, and she did share her experience. She too was subjected to all of the horrific things that he had been doing to his other victims, daily R word, and she had to really heavily comply. She really believed that she was not going to make it out of there alive. It must just be terrifying. She had a child as well, so yeah. And he would tell her things like, you won't be able to escape, or the police were involved in me abducting you and I might sell you online for thousands of pounds and things like that. So it's all just mind games really. And then 2 months later he comes to the dungeon, he puts a hood over her head and he gives her back her clothes. God knows what are they naked? And says, you're going home. But she did not believe that. She, like me in this whole case, was thinking someone's gonna not make it out of here alive. But he does. He takes her to her mother's house, and she is a bit confused about this because she's never spoken about her mother's house or anything like that. So he must get this information from following the cases, because these people are then reported missing and then it's a case. I do believe the first victim didn't even make it into the newspaper, which is shocking and sad. So he takes her back to her mother's house and she is returned and she is alive. And she almost can't believe this. She also told the police about what happened. They were called immediately. She goes to her mum and then she calls the police. She couldn't tell the police where exactly the house was. They drove her round and they tried to find it and she couldn't. She'd only had a glimpse of the house. So that was asking a lot. Now this is... Jennifer said that she knew what car he had. It was a 1975 Mercury in tan colour. They find this car, but the owner of that car is not responsible. They don't clear him, and they're like, oh, like, you got the, like, that's not the guy, it's not him. Turns out that she mistakenly said it was a 1975, but actually everything else was the same. It was just it was a 1974 model. So all she did was get the year wrong, and they were like, oh, she gave us the wrong information, so we didn't find him. What? Would you not think maybe perhaps that she might not get the exact year right? Come along. This has been going on for a long time now. John's been getting away with this for a very, very long time. And he has one final act of horrificness, and that is his fourth victim. She is 16 years old, and she is in fact a runaway. So again, she falls into that really vulnerable category like his first two victims, because they're children. I don't know what it was about this victim. Perhaps the fact that he no longer has his wife living in the house. However, this victim was allowed to live upstairs. So while she was subjected to the same tortures and daily abuse and daily R words, she was allowed to be up in the home, and perhaps he could sense her compliance, the fact that she would be incredibly compliant, and the fact that she was running away. So he definitely, well, no, you would still possibly be looking for a runaway, wouldn't you? But whatever it was, she was allowed to be upstairs. And later on, people would go on to say that there was like Stockholm, can't say it, syndrome. His brazenness with this victim would prove to be his downfall, because not only did he allow her to live up in the house, obviously everything was locked, the windows and the doors, but she was allowed to be upstairs, not in the dungeon. But he also took her out on errands and trips. He took her bowling once. It was like he felt untouchable with this victim, maybe because he'd gotten away with it for so many years, he'd never been caught, or something to do with not feeling like anyone was looking for her. Perhaps like he would have known her story maybe and what she'd said. Whatever it was, he became, she was like a pet almost. It was awful, just sort of taking her out and about, little errands, and she never looked comfortable. People did see them together, and she always looked overwhelmed and like a rabbit in headlights and not well. So she wasn't like having the time of her life with this dude, not at all. Anyhow, so on one trip out, she asked John if she could call the local church and see what times they were open to, like pray. What's the word? I guess pray, or to be open. And he was like, yeah, okay. So he lets her make a phone call. Whoa. Really, just, he must have felt so strongly that she was really like under his spell, under his control, because he was like, yeah, go make your phone call, mate. Also, something to note about John, which I find, I have said this for a long time. People that are really tight, like they are tight, like they won't buy a coffee or a tea when they're out and about on a little trip out, because they're like, oh, I can buy tea bags for £2 for a whole box, that sort of thing. Like, yeah, but just why not enjoy a hot beverage? Enjoy the moment, right? Anyhow, so there are people that are just tight, and I often think, I feel like something bing bing then. I often think that it's in your nature. So whether those people win the lottery or have loads of money or whatever, that they still would have an element of tightness around them, right? I don't know what another word for that is it? Because it feels really harsh to be tight, but I guess it is. Anyway, John proves my point, because he got lots of money. I believe when his wife passed away, he had lots of inheritance, and he became a millionaire. He invested in property and things like that. So when you think of the dank, dark dungeon, his depraved cave where he goes and does these awful things, there's that part of his life, but then he's a millionaire. Like, he's got money, he's wealthy. But despite that, he still goes and does this thing where he collects bottles to go and, I think you hand them in and then you get some money back. Like, what a hobby. And he still is tight. So even though he's really wealthy, Yeah, I just find that fascinating. Time out. While I am also filming this, we are still dealing with the car situation. I'm getting ever more frazzled in my life. Right, no, stop. Where was I? So, she makes a phone call, but she does not ring the church. She rings her sister. Can you imagine how that phone call goes? Anyway, she speaks to her sister. Her sister gets the police to go to where she is, and the police are there very quickly. And this must have just been something else, because the police arrive and she is safe. And they then go to John's home to have a little look at this dungeon. And can you imagine going to this dungeon and seeing the writing on the walls and the damp and the chair with the seat cut out and all of this business, and suddenly realising that the two people that have come to you before, that you have like cold case, not even believed the story, suddenly it's all true, it's there, it's in front of you. First of all, you've realised now that you've just caught a serial R-wordist, and secondly, I hope there was some shame in the people that dismissed, especially the third victim's story, and were so cruel about it. John told the police that this was his girlfriend. That, oh yeah, there's a big age gap, she's my girlfriend though. He still believed that he was going to, he just thought he was going to get away with it. Oh, she's my girlfriend. No, she's fine, she's my girlfriend. And then that man has never taken any accountability. He's like, I wasn't hurting anybody. There are some interviews that you can find on YouTube. It just blows the mind. Oh, I didn't hurt anybody. I wasn't hurting anybody. He does not talk like that. I don't know why that's the voice I've given him, but because it's just so ludicrous. Like, it needs a ludicrous voice. Oh, I didn't hurt anybody. What the man? Come on. You used the R word. This is one of the things. You know, he calls it his dungeon. Well, they're not in a hotel, are they? You know that you're putting them somewhere dungeon-like. And also, you make them keep a diary of when they get R-worded. So you're not calling it S for sex, which would imply consensual. You're using the word, the R word. You know what you're doing to them. So shut up, you weren't hurting anybody. Weird brain man. He was given 18 years for 5 counts of kidnapping. He also maintained that it wasn't that bad. He wasn't hurting them, and that he was doing them a favour. How? What? Honestly, it is bonkers sometimes, isn't it? The fact that he is like that's he's not like, oh, I've been caught, yeah, that was bad. The fact that he's so defiant about it is shocking, and that in itself, to me, would be like, he's not a safe person to have out and about. If he thinks that is okay, not that bad, not hurting someone, do me a favour, keep him in there. I do believe in 2022 he was denied parole. That's good news. It had to be explained to him that kidnapping women, or from kidnapping women in general, doesn't matter where from, and keeping them to be sex slaves is wrong, and deserves a hard punishment. He thought he was going to get a fine. I read in my research that he wanted in his trial, he wanted the judge to know that he was a nice guy. I'm a good person. And he wanted evidence of that. He wanted his lawyers and his team to present that he was a good person, he was a nice guy. And one of those pieces of evidence was that he offered bubble baths to his victims. What a top guy. I think he's eligible for parole in June June what? I just had to do some quick maths. So he was sentenced to 18 years to life. Okay, so to life. I missed that bit off. And that was in 2003. So 18 years would be 2021. And he was denied parole. He's been denied parole twice since then. So every year it comes up, and every year it's, no thank you. He's currently 89 years old. So my thinking here would be that he will keep being denied parole until he passes away. Or he'll get so sort of decrepit and old, and they'll be like, he's not a threat to society anymore, and then he might be released for like the end of his life. Who knows? When I was there wasn't a murder, and I don't think I've ever covered a case where there hasn't actually been a murder in it. This is a first, but it really captured me, because in so many cases that we do see where people do end up murdering people as well, and maybe he would have gone on to do that, but the fact that he seemed to capture and release makes me think that that was quite a strong MO for him. And he was so brazen, and he didn't feel, maybe that is what saved their lives, because he didn't feel like he was doing anything wrong. If he truly believes that he was doing them a favour and it wasn't that bad, and that what he was doing was like all right, maybe that's what kept them alive. Because sometimes it's the I'm going to get caught, oh my god, how am I going to get out of this, that sometimes leads to the murder at the end of the other crimes that have been committed. So maybe that did keep his victims alive. And it doesn't minimise it at all, does it? Because they have to live with that absolute trauma, and I just feel for them so much. It's just horrific, really horrific. I will link some of the videos in my description if I can. Am I allowed to do that? I guess so. I'll look into it. If not, if they're not there, it's because I'm not sure. But yeah, that is all I have for you on today's case. What a case. Say it every week. What a case. Unbelievable. It's like a horror film. Anyhow, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. Hope you can join me next week for another true crime story and maybe a glass of gin. Loving the case suggestions, by the way. I get them in the comments and on Instagram. I'm on Instagram, if you didn't know. I will put that in the description box. I know I'm allowed to do that. And also Patreon. So give me a shout out if you are on the Patreon about what sort of content you want me to be popping up there. There are some bits on there already, but I have neglected it for a while. So I'm going to go back to making content on there. Like, it's just short bits and bobs. I did an unboxing of a gym box, and I've done my makeup and little chit chats and things like that on there. Yes, and pictures of the dog. I think there's a few. But anyway, if you think of anything that you want on there, just short little bits of content that I can add in, let me know. And again, I will put the Patreon link in the description box. And I think it's in a pinned comment, which I forgot to do last week. I've just remembered. Lots of things to remember at the moment. I'm only human. Gonna love you and leave you, because I'm not gonna lie, I need to go and sort out the situation with my car. It's being held hostage, and it's just something else. I will see you all next week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I've said that already. Be good. Bye.